This learning object is a production of Abu Dhabi Men's College, Center of Excellence for ICT and Learning Technology.
Well, it's a great time to turn to the audience. Questions, comments, please speak up. Right there, start a point.
I'd like to ask, Serge Morcel again, Allied Women's College. I'd like to ask a question to the panel concerning, if you have to make cuts in your schools, could you address the question of the need for transparency and maybe consulting staff and students? Thank you.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think that's, at least for us, a top on the list, right from the beginning. We do a number of things, and we formed a budget council 2 years ago that explores ways in which we can make strategic decisions. We put more focus on our strategic plan so that it becomes a working document instead of something that sits on the shelf, so typical in many colleges and universities, and we make decisions about that. We hold regular college meetings. I do a weekly email update to all employees about the state of the state and the state of the college and what we know and where we're heading. We're trying to make everything, as much as we can, as transparent as we can. Where we stop short is where we're thinking about impacting people's jobs. We don't make that so transparent. If we go in that direction, the conversations occur with the individuals privately first, and then a larger conversation. But as we do these kinds of things, again, if I might, it's important to ask ourselves, so when we're done, what kinds of strategic investments will we be able to make? And I'd like to suggest that all of us in this room today, yesterday and tomorrow, have an opportunity to ask ourselves, particularly around the global issue, what kinds of things can we do together differently as different institutions from all over the world, different levels of institutions? Dr. Chan mentioned this global conversations which we started at Cascadia last fall. Last fall, as a result of a trip that several of us took to Southeast Asia with IIE, we made some connections with Indonesia. And we had a 90-minute global conversation last fall, just before the U.S. elections. 15 of our students spoke with, live, groups of students from 2 universities in Jakarta around our election, around Obama. One of the students came to me afterwards and he said, you know what? They're pretty much like us. I'd love to explore opportunities for all of us to develop some partnerships for those kinds of global conversations. As we consider how do we make our cuts transparent, we also have to make our strategic investments transparent as well.
Anybody else but Esther?
I've been a president for 17 years, and these are very difficult questions. The experience at my institution, which was in deep financial trouble when I arrived, was that budget committees had not worked. It was too difficult for people to cut their colleagues. So we had conversations. At that point, we were a unicellular institution. We were a women's liberal arts college. Today, we're a university predominantly graduate, but still with a women's college. We had long discussions about what really constitutes the liberal arts. People knew something had to go, but we had the philosophical discussions first. And then I took the responsibility for placing that on a budget schedule and deciding how far down the list to go in order to balance the budget, because it was clear that my faculty colleagues were not going to be able to do that when the priorities discussion translated into a cuts discussion. So there was a lot of transparency in what were the priorities and the values, but that's what administrators are for, to eventually have to take the heat, I think, for those decisions. And that was 20% cut in faculty and staff. It was difficult.
Alistair, what's your view on transparency?
I'm sure mine will be similar to all of the panelists in terms of the absolute importance of setting a clear goal, set of priorities, having within all of the members of the community. But it does give me an opportunity to emphasize that I'm actually quite surprised that there's one component of our community not here, predominantly today, which are the students. And in fact, to raise, as Harriet said, the elephant in the room here, which is we all talk about how our students are so much ahead of us. No one has mentioned the fact that actually they're way, way ahead of us in terms of Facebook. They are actually using knowledge in ways that none of us ever contemplate doing, and all of the students who attended the EWB conference were already connected on Facebook, knew all of them, the people who were going to be turning up, and were actually saying, oh, you're so much better to look at in the flesh than you looked at in your picture, because they knew what was going on. So I think we have to make much more effort to be in their world and understand what they need when we're talking about the educational process and when it comes to making cuts. And like Esther, I think I'm in my third round of 16% cuts at the institution.
I'm going to take one more comment from Jay, and then I'm going to go back out to the audience. Jay?
I'd like to just comment briefly on a couple of things. The communication dimension of this is one of the real challenges, and I was struck by, I think there is real consistency among us philosophically, but how you put it into practice is a real challenge. As an example, one of the inefficiencies that comes from turbulent times is our assumptions are changing and changing and changing. There's not a variable in our spreadsheets that have not changed multiple times over the last several weeks. The unknowns are really vexing. How far is it to the other side? How deep is the water between here and a recovery? And finally, someone in an earlier panel mentioned the impact of fear. And one of the things that I started carrying with me, because I find it having use over and over, is a New York Times article written by Greg Burns, a neuroscientist at Emory, that talks about the impact of fear on us emotionally. And in essence, what fear does is it shuts us down. Burns says that the most concrete thing that neuroscience tells us is that when the fear system of the brain is active, exploratory activity and risk-taking are turned off. And the first order of business then is to neutralize the system. And I find this back to the fundamental challenge that I have encountered in this process of trying to be transparent, trying to be authentic, is both being a realistic articulator of the world as we know it, while also trying to protect people from being frozen by fear. So retaining a sense of hope and optimism in a time that truly